In the freezing, suffocating stillness of 5 a.m., the harsh, unforgiving chime of my iPhone shattered the silence of my bedroom. The screen illuminated the dark, high-ceilinged room of my Beacon Hill brownstone, casting a pale, clinical blue light across the imported silk sheets. I reached out, my fingers cold, and picked up the device. A single text message from my 34-year-old daughter, Chloe, stared back at me. "Mom, plans changed. You're not coming on the Monaco cruise next week. Julian wants only his family there. He says the Mediterranean air is too unpredictable for someone your age, and honestly, we just need our own space to heal. Don't worry, we'll bring you back a souvenir from the Riviera." My breath hitched. My heart hammered against my ribs, a slow, heavy, painful thud that echoed in my ears. The words blurred, reforming, then hardening into a jagged piece of glass that pierced directly into my chest. "You're not coming. Julian wants only his family there. Julian." The 31-year-old smooth-talking opportunist Chant Vung, the son-in-law I had foolishly tolerated, a man who married my daughter and immediately treated my decades of hard-earned wealth as his personal playground, and Chloe, my own flesh and blood, a girl I had raised under the strict, uncompromising discipline of the Caldwell legacy, had become a spineless puppet, reading from his toxic script. Before the tears could even dare to form in my eyes, the cold, calculated survival instincts that had allowed me to dominate the cutthroat corporate landscape of Boston for 40 years completely took over. Anger, I had learned long ago in boardroom trenches, was a waste of expensive energy. You do not throw tantrums. You inspect the structural rot, and you cut it out with surgical precision. I slid out of bed, my movements fluid and mechanical, utterly devoid of the fragile weakness they assumed I possessed. I threw on a heavy cashmere robe against the damp New England chill and walked down the long, echoing corridor to my private study. The house was empty. It had been painfully, deafeningly empty for 5 years, ever since my beloved husband, Arthur, passed away. I sat down at my heavy mahogany desk, the very desk where Arthur and I had built the Caldwell Group from a small boutique investment firm into a multi-million-dollar financial empire. On the corner of the desk sat his vintage Patek Philippe pocket watch, its rhythmic mechanical ticking the only sound in the room. This trip to Monaco wasn't a casual luxury vacation. It was a sacred pilgrimage. It was a $120,000 voyage I had paid for entirely out of my private solo account, booking the exclusive Royal Penthouse suite on a 7-star private luxury liner to honor Arthur's memory. Monaco was where he had proposed to me 45 years ago under the Mediterranean stars. We had promised to return for our golden anniversary. He didn't make it, but I was going to take our daughter there to lay his favorite silver cufflinks into the sea. And now, a cowardly text at dawn was uninviting me from my own $120,000 gift, hijacking my sacred grief to give a free luxury vacation to Julian's parasitic family. My face became a mask of pure stone. My hands did not shake as I opened my laptop and logged directly into the luxury cruise line's secure passenger portal, pasting the long booking reference number. The loading icon spun, a small, mocking circle. When the page finally populated, my eyes locked onto the primary guest details. My name, Eleanor Caldwell, was completely gone. It hadn't been moved. It hadn't been downgraded. It had been systematically, ruthlessly erased from the digital manifest. In the exact space where my name belonged, boldly occupying the master bedroom of the Royal Penthouse, was Richard Vance and Margaret Vance, Julian's parents. The very people who, for the last 3 years, had made thinly veiled, arrogant comments about my cold corporate nature while happily sipping my vintage wine at Thanksgiving, were now the primary occupants of a luxury trip I financed with my blood, sweat, and tears. And below them was Valerie Vance, Julian's 26-year-old utterly useless sister, an influencer whose entire existence consisted of posting superficial, heavily filtered photos of a lifestyle she could never afford, living rent-free on credit cards I covertly paid off to keep Chloe happy. They hadn't just uninvited me. They had logged into my secure account, deliberately hijacked my paid reservation, and handed a small fortune in luxury travel to a family of greedy parasites who meant absolutely nothing to me. They thought I was a tired, lonely, clueless old Goa foo who would just roll over and accept the disrespect because I was desperate for family connection. They mistook my silence for submission. They forgot who I was. They forgot that you do not build a financial empire in Boston by letting thieves walk away with your raw assets. With a slow, chilling clarity settling over my mind, I clicked open my phone to call Mitchell Reed, my trusted corporate attorney and closest confidant for 35 years. Mitchell was the legal shark who had drafted every ironclad contract for the Caldwell Group, the only man who knew the exact labyrinth of my assets. He would help me initiate a financial slaughter that would permanently ruin the Vance name. The phone rang once, twice. Then Mitchell picked up. "Eleanor!" Mitchell's voice came through the speaker, but it lacked his usual warm, growly professional greeting. It was tight, nervous, distant. "Mitchell," I said, my voice perfectly level, hiding the storm brewing inside me. "I need you at my brownstone immediately. We are pulling the blueprints on the family trust. Chloe and Julian have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. I am liquidating the Beacon Hill estate they are living in, and I want their financial lifelines severed by noon." A heavy, suffocating silence pressed through the line. I could hear the faint, rhythmic scratching of a fountain pen on paper on his end. "I can't do that, Eleanor," Mitchell said softly. I paused, my fingers tightening around the leather casing of my phone. "What do you mean you can't, Mitchell? You are the head of my legal counsel." "I was the head of your legal counsel, Eleanor," Mitchell replied, his tone dropping into a cold, clinical register that made the blood in my veins instantly turn to absolute ice. "As of midnight, I have officially accepted a private retainer to represent the Caldwell Trust's primary beneficiaries, Chloe and Julian. And right now, I am looking at a preliminary medical affidavit signed by a licensed physician stating that you are currently exhibiting severe, undeniable signs of advanced cognitive decline and early onset dementia." My breathing stopped completely. The room seemed to tilt. Mitchell, the man who had stood beside me at Arthur's funeral, the man who knew every secret of my life, had vanished into the enemy camp. "Mitchell, you know that is a fraudulent, malicious lie," I whispered, my voice dropping to a dangerous, freezing register. "The court doesn't know that, Eleanor," Mitchell said, his voice entirely devoid of the 35 years of friendship we shared. "The paperwork is already sitting in the secure digital queue of the probate court, and tomorrow morning, the moment Chloe and Julian's cruise sails into international waters, I am officially filing the emergency petition for total guardianship. By the time they return, you will be safely transitioned into a secure memory care facility, and total legal control of the Caldwell Group will officially belong to them." He paused, the mechanical ticking of Arthur's pocket watch on my desk suddenly sounding like a ticking time bomb. "Don't make a scene, Eleanor. For your own good, just stay home, relax, and let the quiet time wash over you. It's already over." The line went dead. The dial tone droned in my ear, a flat, robotic hum that sounded like a life support machine cutting out. I slowly lowered the phone, the cold glass screen slipping against my palm. Outside, the Boston sky began to bleed a pale, bruised violet, the morning mist rolling off the Charles River and clinging to the brick facades of Beacon Hill like a shroud. The rhythmic, mechanical ticking of Arthur's Patek Philippe pocket watch on my mahogany desk seemed to grow louder, filling the silence of the room. Tick, tick, tick. Each strike felt like a hammer coming down on a coffin nail. Mitchell, my sharpest weapon, my oldest confidant, a man who had sat at my dinner table for 35 years, had not just defected, he had built the gallows. A profound, hollow ache settled deep within my chest, but it wasn't the fragile sorrow of a victim. It was the heavy, suffocating weight of a mother's retrospective guilt. I looked at a framed photograph on the bookshelf, a younger Chloe laughing, her blonde curls bouncing as Arthur held her hand on the docks of Martha's Vineyard. I had poured everything into her. When Arthur died, I didn't just give her an inheritance. I shielded her. I shielded her from the brutal realities of the market, built a multi-million-dollar trust so she would never know the exhausting anxiety of survival, and custom-ordered her world to ensure her absolute comfort. And my reward? She had traded her father's legacy and my protection for a slick, predatory parasite, allowing Julian to use my own love as a weapon against me. They didn't see a mother who had sacrificed her youth to build a fortress for them. They saw a cash cow, a fading matriarch whose expiration date they were eager to accelerate. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the heavy, echoing thud of the front door downstairs swinging open. Footsteps, sharp, confident, and completely uninvited, echoed up the spiral wooden staircase. It wasn't the hesitant stride of a stranger. It was the familiar, arrogant swagger of Julian, accompanied by the lighter, rushed clicking of Chloe's designer heels. They weren't waiting for tomorrow. They weren't waiting for the cruise to sail. The ambush was happening now. I didn't move from my leather chair. I didn't hide the laptop. I simply sat perfectly still, steepling my fingers, my face freezing into the unyielding, expressionless mask of a CEO presiding over a hostile takeover. The double doors of my study burst open. Julian stepped in first. He was dressed in a tailored navy blazer and white linen trousers, his curated nautical billionaire look, with a silver sweater casually draped over his shoulders. His hair was perfectly styled, but his eyes, sharp and predatory, instantly scanned the room before locking onto me. Behind him, Chloe hesitated, her fingers clutching a Chanel handbag, her face a pale, nervous twitch of guilt and synthetic resolve. "Eleanor," Julian said, his voice dripping with a smooth, theatrical warmth that made my stomach turn. He walked straight toward my desk, completely ignoring the boundary of my personal space, and placed both hands on the edge of the mahogany wood. "We saw the lights on. We figured you'd be up. I assume Mitchell called you?" I remained completely silent. I didn't blink. I just stared directly into his eyes, letting the dead air press against his arrogance. Chloe shifted from foot to foot behind him, unable to meet my gaze. "Mom, please don't look at us like that," she stammered, her voice thin and high-pitched. "We did this for you. You have to understand. This is for your own good." "For my own good?" I asked, my voice a low, chilling whisper that possessed no parental affection. "By erasing my name from a trip I financed? By fabricating a psychiatric evaluation?" Julian let out a soft, condescending chuckle, shaking his head as if he were dealing with a stubborn, irrational child. "See? This is exactly what the doctor was talking about, Eleanor. The paranoia, the wild, defensive accusations." He leaned closer, his breath smelling faintly of expensive espresso. "Let's be entirely honest with ourselves here. You haven't been right since Arthur died. You sit in this dark house, obsessing over the past, isolating yourself from the people who love you. You missed 3 corporate board meetings last quarter, Eleanor. You forgot the anniversary of our wedding last month. The cognitive decline is obvious to everyone except you. I missed those meetings because I was restructuring the international logistics branch, Julian. A detail your mediocre mind wouldn't understand. I replied smoothly, my voice flat, entirely devoid of anger. And I didn't forget your anniversary. I chose to ignore it because I don't celebrate the day my daughter legally bound herself to a parasite. Chloe flinched, but Julian's smile didn't fade. Instead, his eyes narrowed into something deeply venomous, the mask of the polite son-in-law completely slipping away. "You can play the tough matriarch all you want, Eleanor, but the board is shifting," Julian hissed, his tone dropping its artificial warmth. "Older people like you get so brittle, so easily confused under pressure. You're a liability to the Caldwell Group now. Your stubbornness is actively hurting our future. The royal penthouse suite? You would just be tired, complaining about the sea legs and dragging us down with your depressing grief. My parents are in much better physical and mental shape to actually appreciate that kind of luxury. They deserve it. You belong here, in the quiet, where you can't break anything else." "Julian is right, Mom," Chloe cut in, her voice hardening as she tried to convince herself of her own lie. "You're always so controlling, always making everything about your sacrifices. It's exhausting. Julian's sister Valerie needs this trip for her career. She's an influencer, Mom. She needs the exposure of the Monaco Grand Prix. You're just being selfish. We're doing you a favor by taking the burden of this travel off your hands. And as for the estate, we need to stabilize the family assets before your mind slips away completely. I listened to my daughter gaslight me with the very vocabulary Julian had undoubtedly drilled into her head for months. She was weaponizing my mourning, transforming my quiet dignity into manufactured madness. A profound wave of disgust washed over me, but I channeled it entirely into an impenetrable, icy stillness. I didn't scream. I didn't defend my sanity. I let them talk, letting the spring of their arrogance wind tighter and tighter. "Is that all?" I asked quietly, leaning back in my chair. "Not quite," Julian said, a sickening, victorious smirk spreading across his face. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a sleek, velvet-lined box. He opened it and dumped the contents onto my desk. With a metallic clatter, a heavy, intricately carved platinum necklace slid across the wood. My heart stopped. The ice in my veins turned to liquid fire. It was the Caldwell star, a flawless 10-carat blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds. It was Arthur's wedding gift to me, an irreplaceable family heirloom passed down through 3 generations of Caldwell women. It was the one piece of jewelry I kept in my private bedroom safe, never in the bank vaults because I wore it every year on Arthur's birthday. "What is the meaning of this?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet, though my chest burned with a furious, primitive instinct to rip that box from his hands. "Consider it an early repossession," Julian said, his voice dripping with unadulterated malice. "Chloe and I went into your master bedroom while you were down here. We know the code to your safe, Eleanor. You used Arthur's birthday. How predictably sentimental. The court-appointed physician agreed that keeping assets of this magnitude in an unsecure residential safe is clear evidence of erratic, irresponsible behavior. Valerie is going to wear the Caldwell star to the gala in Monaco next week. It will look much better on her young, vibrant neck than gathering dust in your drawer. Julian, give that back to me immediately," I said, my voice dropping to a register so terrifyingly dark that Chloe actually took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. But Julian didn't flinch. He knew he had Mitchell in his pocket. He knew he had the legal papers queued up. He thought he had completely outmaneuvered the old queen. "No, Eleanor," Julian whispered, leaning down so his face was inches from mine. "You don't dictate the rules anymore. Tomorrow, we get on that ship. Next Tuesday, Mitchell files the emergency guardianship order. The judge will sign it based on the medical affidavit and your history of recent isolation. When we get back from France, you won't even have a key to this brownstone. A medical transport team will meet you at the door to take you to a beautiful, highly secure facility in Vermont. You'll have a lovely view of the mountains, Eleanor. But the Caldwell Group, this house, the bank accounts, and the Caldwell Star, they belong to us now." I sat in the dim light of the study, staring at the platinum necklace lying on my desk like a trophy of my permanent defeat. I was trapped. If I filed an injunction now, Mitchell would use my immediate defensive reaction as proof of erratic, combative behavior, triggering an immediate emergency psychiatric hold before the cruise even sailed. If I called the police for the theft of the necklace, they would see a family dispute over an heirloom, backed by a legal counsel who would claim it was removed for safeguarding due to my mental state. They had designed the perfect, inescapable legal cage. Julian picked up the necklace, sliding it into his pocket with a slow, deliberate movement that felt like a slap to my face. He patted his jacket, looking down at me with the ultimate, insufferable pity of a predator who believed the prey was entirely broken. "Just stay home, Eleanor," Julian said smoothly, turning toward the door. "Relax. Don't cause a scene. Enjoy the quiet time alone. We'll see you when we get back from paradise." Chloe followed him out, refusing to look back, the door clicking shut behind them with a definitive, sickening snap. I sat alone in the dark, the echo of their footsteps fading down the stairs. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating, punctuated only by the steady, mechanical ticking of Arthur's pocket watch. Tick, tick, tick. I looked down at my hands resting on the mahogany desk. They were perfectly steady. The profound sorrow was entirely gone now, completely evaporated into the freezing morning air. In its place was a sharp, blinding, hyper-focused, tactical fury. They thought they were dealing with a helpless, broken Goa foo. They didn't understand that a woman who spent 40 years dominating the financial sharks of New England doesn't surrender her kingdom to a pair of cheap thieves. They wanted a war, They had loaded the gun and pointed it at my head, but as I reached for my phone to make a call to a very specific, ruthless contact outside of Mitchell's network, I realized something they had completely overlooked. They thought they had built the perfect trap, but they forgot that I was the architect who had built their entire world, and I knew exactly which pillar to pull to bring the whole heavy structure screaming down onto their heads. By 10 a.m. the following morning, the crisp New England spring breeze did little to clear the heavy, toxic atmosphere inside my study. The mahogany desk felt colder than usual. I sat in the exact same leather chair, staring out the window as a light, mocking rain began to pelt against the glass pane, blurring the historic brick streets of Beacon Hill. The spring of the trap was wound to its absolute limit. Just 3 hours ago, I had watched from behind the lace curtains as a premium black town car pulled up to the curb. Julian, Chloe, and his sister Valerie had loaded their luggage, laughing with an insufferable, unearned triumph, heading toward the Boston cruise terminal to board the ultra-luxury private vessel that my money had bought. They believed they had left a broken, defeated old woman behind. They believed the crown was already theirs, but my mind was operating at a terrifying, hyper-vigilant speed. The moment their car disappeared around the corner, I had reached into my desk drawer and pulled out an old encrypted burner phone. There was one person who could bypass Mitchell Reed's legal blockade: Robert Vance, Julian's estranged uncle, and a fiercely brilliant forensic accountant who hated his own brother's family with a passion. Robert had spent decades dismantling corporate frauds in New York, and he possessed the specific financial authority to freeze the Caldwell Trust's subsidiary accounts if I provided him with proof of Julian's unauthorized asset access. He was my hidden ace, my ultimate counteroffensive weapon. I dialed the private number. I needed him to initiate a forensic freeze on the $400,000 emergency checking account before Julian's corrupt lawyer could file the guardianship paperwork next Tuesday. The line rang 4 times. Then a voice answered, but it wasn't Robert. It was a sterile, chaotic background filled with the rhythmic bleeping of medical monitors and the rushed murmurs of hospital staff. "Hello? Is this a relative of Robert Vance?" a hurried, clinical voice asked. My throat went dry. "This is Eleanor Caldwell, a close associate. What is happening?" "Mr. Vance was involved in a severe hit-and-run collision on the Massachusetts Turnpike late last night," the nurse replied flatly. "His vehicle was struck by a heavy commercial truck that fled the scene. He is currently in the intensive care unit with multiple fractures and a severe concussion. He is heavily sedated and entirely non-responsive. He won't be able to receive any calls or visitors for at least the next 2 weeks." The line went completely dead as I slowly lowered the burner phone. A cold, heavy numbness washed over me. My hidden ace was gone. The hit and run was too perfectly timed, too clean to be a mere coincidence. Julian and Mitchell had covered every single exit. They hadn't just loaded the gun. They had systematically slaughtered my entire defensive line while I was still trying to process their betrayal. For a single terrifying second, the ground beneath my feet felt like it was crumbling into a bottomless abyss. I was entirely alone, stripped of my attorney, stripped of my forensic accountant, and stripped of my husband's heirloom necklace. I had no legal shield, no financial backup, and only 4 days left before a corrupt probate judge would sign away my fundamental human rights. Suddenly, the screen of my primary smartphone illuminated on the mahogany desk, vibrating harshly against the wood. The caller ID displayed Chloe's name. I stared at the flashing screen for 3 full rings. I forced the panic down, buried the cold dread deep into the frozen core of my being, and channeled every ounce of my remaining energy into a state of absolute, deceptive submission. I swiped the green icon and brought the phone to my ear, remaining completely, intentionally silent. "Mom, are you there?" Chloe's voice came through the speaker, but she wasn't crying anymore. The background was filled with the low, elegant murmur of a jazz quartet and the clinking of crystal glasses. They were already in the exclusive VIP lounge at the embarkation terminal, sipping complimentary champagne. "Yes, Chloe, I am here," I replied, my voice deliberately thin, slightly shaky, perfectly mimicking the fragile, broken mother they wanted me to be. "Oh, thank goodness," Chloe gushed, though her tone was saturated with a patronizing, sickening pity. "Julian and I were just talking about you, Mom. We were worried you'd be sitting in that big dark house all by yourself, getting confused or making yourself sick over Dad's watch. I just wanted to check in and make sure you've taken your medication today. You remember what the doctor said about your routine, right? If you don't stick to the schedule, your mind starts to wander, and we really don't want you wandering out into the street again. The sheer venomous audacity of her gaslighting was breathtaking. I had never wandered into the street in my entire life. I had run a multi-million-dollar board meeting less than a month ago. Yet she was already laying the verbal groundwork, treating me like a senile child to justify her incoming crime. "I am fine, Chloe," I whispered, letting a rehearsed breath of exhaustion slip through the microphone. "I am just very tired. The house feels very empty today." A sharp, arrogant scoff echoed over the line, and the phone was clearly ripped from Chloe's hand. Julian's smooth, predatory baritone took over the speaker. "Let's cut the tragics act, Eleanor," Julian said, his voice dripping with an insufferable, victorious malice. I could practically hear the smug grin on his face as he swirled a glass of premium bourbon. "We know you tried to call Mitchell's private line again this morning. Let me make this incredibly clear to your fading memory. Mitchell works for us now. The paperwork is finalized. The legal framework is locked. You are completely exposed, Eleanor, and there isn't a single corporate board member or high-priced attorney in Boston who is going to listen to a word you say. They all think you're losing it. And honestly, they're right." I held my breath, my jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in my neck strained against my skin. My right hand gripped the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned stark white, but I didn't interrupt him. I didn't scream. I let him talk, letting his arrogance inflate until it became a liability. "You built a nice little empire, Eleanor, I'll give you that," Julian continued, his tone turning deeply condescending, treating me like a defeated peasant. "But you're old money. You're slow, sentimental, and completely outdated. You actually thought you could keep a $120,000 royal penthouse suite all to yourself just to throw some cheap silver cufflinks into the water? What a pathetic waste of capital. Valerie is currently taking photos on the private deck right now, Eleanor. The Caldwell name is finally being used to fund a lifestyle that actually matters. My parents are currently lying in your custom-imported silk sheets in the master cabin, laughing about how easily the old lioness surrendered her pride. Julian, I said, my voice intentionally trembling, playing the role of the utterly defeated matriarch to absolute perfection. Please, that trip was for Arthur. The Caldwell Star was Arthur's legacy to our daughter. You cannot do this to our family. Family? Julian laughed, a harsh, greedy sound that echoed chillingly through the phone. You stopped having a family the moment you decided to control every single dime, Eleanor. You kept Chloe on a leash with that revocable trust, making her beg for her own birthright. Well, the leash is broken. By this time next week, when our luxury liner docks in the French Riviera, the probate judge will have signed the emergency order. Mitchell will have full execution power over your assets. We are going to restructure the Caldwell Group, Eleanor. We are going to liquidate your sentimental little real estate holdings, and we are going to use your liquid accounts to fund our own international investment firm. You're done. Chloe's voice echoed faintly in the background, muffled but clear enough for me to hear. Julian, honey, stop being so harsh on her. She's old. Just tell her to stay in her room so the maids can pack up the rest of her jewelry next week. Julian chuckled, completely ignoring his wife's superficial attempt at restraint. You heard her, Eleanor. Be a good little Goa foo. Stay in your dark study. Don't touch the bank accounts. Don't try to contact any of your old business associates, and don't make a messy scene. If you behave, maybe we'll let you keep Arthur's pocket watch when we move you to the facility in Vermont. If you fight us, Eleanor, I will personally ensure that you spend the rest of your natural life in a sterile, locked room without a single scrap of your precious memories. Do you understand your position now? I closed my eyes, a single cold tear of pure, unadulterated fury slipping down my cheek. The paternal love, the maternal instinct, the fragile hope that my daughter would suddenly find her spine, it all burned away into ash, leaving nothing but an ocean of pure, freezing ice within my soul. The man speaking to me wasn't a son-in-law. He was a dangerous, parasitic criminal who was actively trying to bury me alive, and my daughter was his willing accomplice. "I understand completely, Julian," I said softly, my voice perfectly flat, entirely devoid of any remaining resistance. "The plans have changed. I won't cause any trouble. Enjoy the Mediterranean air. Have a wonderful, memorable voyage with the Vance family." "That's more like it, Eleanor," Julian gushed, his voice bubbling with an insufferable Trich-Thung triumph. "I knew you'd eventually see reason once you realized you had absolutely no cards left to play. I have to go now. The captain is welcoming the VIP guests to the bridge, and Valerie wants me to take a photo of her wearing that beautiful blue sapphire necklace against the harbor view. We'll check in on you when we hit international waters. Try not to forget who you are before we get back." The line clicked shut. The dead air returned, cold and absolute. I pulled the phone away from my ear and set it flat on the mahogany desk. I stood up, my movements no longer slow or heavy, but charged with a sudden massive surge of chilling, hyper-focused tactical energy. Julian believed he had won. He believed that because Robert Vance was in a hospital bed and Mitchell Reed was in his pocket, I was completely neutralized. He thought my silence was the pathetic submission of a defeated old woman. He was catastrophically wrong. He had forgotten that a woman who spent 40 years dominating the financial wolves of Boston didn't survive by relying on a single ally. He thought he had taken my last card. He had no idea that he had just casually handed me the exact emotional and verbal ammunition I needed to thoroughly, systematically destroy his entire universe. I looked down at Arthur's pocket watch, its steady ticking now sounding like a war drum. The time for Nahannuk was over. They had officially declared war, and I was about to deliver a financial and legal slaughter so profoundly devastating that the Vance name would be permanently erased from civilized society. I reached into my drawer, retrieved a third, completely unrecorded encrypted device, and dialed a number I hadn't called since the Caldwell Group liquidated its offshore maritime holdings a decade ago. It was time to initiate the second phase of my response. As the final, mocking echo of Julian's laugh faded from the speaker, the silence that rushed back into the room felt heavy, absolute, and stark. I did not immediately set the phone down. I held it for a few seconds, watching the digital screen lock itself, shifting from a bright display of numbers into a dark, mirror-like black glass. In that reflection, I saw my own face. There were no tears, no trembling lines of panic, no fragile, broken grimace of a defeated mother. My eyes were wide, clear, and perfectly focused, staring back at me with the predatory stillness of a hawk watching a field mouse celebrate too early. Julian believed he had just broken the old queen. He believed that my soft, trembling voice over the receiver was the sound of a spirit snapping under the weight of his psychological assault. I let him believe it. In the high-stakes game of corporate warfare, the most dangerous position your enemy can take is the position of absolute, unchecked certainty. When a man believes he has completely won, he stops looking at the ground beneath his feet. He stops checking the locks. He lowers his shield, opens his arms, and invites his own destruction. I stood up from the desk, my movements smooth and deliberate, entirely devoid of the physical brittleness Julian had so arrogantly described. I walked over to the tall, floor-to-ceiling windows of my study, looking out over the rain-slicked rooftops of Beacon Hill. Down on the street, the black town car carrying my daughter and her husband was long gone, speeding toward the harbor where the luxury cruise liner was preparing to cast off. My mind retraced the details of the phone call, turning Julian's arrogant words over and over, not out of pain, but out of cold, analytical necessity. "Mitchell works for us now. The paperwork is finalized. Valerie is taking photos with the Caldwell Star right now." Every insult, every smug piece of gaslighting was not a blow to my ego. It was a data point. It was a clear map of their structural flaws. But it was the tragic news of Robert Vance's hit and run on the Massachusetts Turnpike that truly occupied my thoughts. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass window, my eyes narrowing into a sharp, piercing stare. Julian and Mitchell believed that by putting Robert in a hospital bed, they had severed my right arm. They believed they had eliminated the only forensic accountant who could trace their illicit activities. They were wrong. They had made a catastrophic, foundational error. By orchestrating that hit and run, or at the very least celebrating its perfect timing, They had left a massive, glowing thread of desperation. Julian was sloppy. He was a man driven by immediate greed, not long-term strategy. To pull off a hit and run of that scale, or to coordinate a medical affidavit with a corrupt doctor overnight, required immediate, unchecked liquid capital. It required cash, lots of it, and it had to happen fast. I walked back to my desk, sitting down with a quiet, definitive grace. I opened my laptop once more, but I bypassed the public portals and the standard bank accounts. Instead, I accessed a hidden secondary digital vault, a secure, offline ledger that tracked the master liquidity of the Caldwell Group's foundational assets. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the soft, rapid clicking sounding like a countdown in the quiet room. I pulled up the transaction history for the $400,000 emergency checking account, the joint account I had established for Chloe during her university days at Harvard. For decades, that account had sat dormant, a silent pillar of security. I scrolled down to the recent activity section. My eyes locked onto the screen, a slow, chilling smile spreading across my face. There it was, their fatal blunder. Within the last 48 hours, there were 3 consecutive back-to-back cash withdrawals. Each transaction was for the exact same, highly specific numerical amount, $9,950. 3 separate withdrawals, executed within minutes of each other at different branches across Boston, totaling $29,850 of raw, untraceable cash. I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers, my gaze fixed on those numbers with absolute thou suat precision. As a woman who had spent 40 years navigating the strict, unforgiving federal regulations of banking and corporate finance, I knew exactly what those numbers meant. You do not withdraw exactly $9,950 3 times by coincidence. In the United States financial system, any single cash transaction of $10,000 or more automatically triggers a mandatory currency transaction report, CTR, directly to the Internal Revenue Service and the federal government. It is an automated system designed to catch money laundering and corporate fraud. By deliberately keeping each withdrawal just $50 under that legal reporting threshold, Julian hadn't just stolen my money. He had engaged in a highly calculated, deeply illegal federal financial maneuver known as structuring. It was a felony, a massive, undeniable federal crime. Julian had been so desperate to secure the untraceable cash needed to bribe the corrupt physician for my fraudulent Alzheimer's diagnosis, and perhaps to pay off the shadows who handled Robert's accident, that he had walked directly into a federal buzzsaw. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was hiding from the system. He had no idea he had just left a massive, permanent digital footprint that no high-priced attorney could ever erase. An overwhelming surge of cold, focused energy flooded my veins. The spring of the luxury trap was now entirely in my hands. I reached into my pocket, retrieved my unrecorded burner phone, and dialed a number I had kept memorized for a decade. It belonged to Special Agent Marcus Vance, Robert Vance's eldest son and a senior investigator with the white-collar crime division of the FBI. Marcus didn't just have the badges. He had a deep, burning desire to see his father's parasitic brother and nephew brought to absolute justice. The call connected on the second ring. "Eleanor!" Marcus's voice came through, low, sharp, and instantly alert. "I just got back from the hospital. My father is stable, but someone did this to him on purpose. The truck was a rental registered to a shell company." "I know, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, chillingly steady whisper of pure authority. "And the people who authorized it just left a permanent trail of blood in my bank accounts. I am looking at 3 structured withdrawals of $9,950 from my joint emergency account, executed by Julian Vance within the last 2 days. He used that cash to bribe a licensed physician to falsify a medical affidavit of early-onset dementia against me, aiming to seize control of the Caldwell Group." There was a sharp, sudden intake of breath on the other end of the line. I could hear the immediate, aggressive rustle of papers and the rapid tapping of a government keyboard. "Structuring cash to finance elder fraud and medical conspiracy," Marcus whispered, his tone hardening into a cold, professional fury. That's a federal indictment, Eleanor. We can freeze his passport. We can issue an arrest warrant right now. No, I interrupted smoothly, my eyes flashing with a dangerous, calculating light. Do not touch them yet. If you freeze his assets now, Mitchell Reed will instantly realize the plot is exposed. He will pull the guardianship petition from the docket, scramble the legal tracks, and bury the evidence before it reaches a judge. We need them to feel completely, utterly victorious. We need them to sail into international waters, totally cut off from the shore, believing that their trap is working perfectly. What is the play, Eleanor? Marcus asked, his voice dripping with deep respect for my strategy. We are going to let them think I have completely collapsed, I stated flatly, my words crisp and deliberate. I am going to initiate a state of total surrender. I will close the blinds of my brownstone. I will stop answering my corporate calls. I will let Mitchell Reed believe that I am a terrified, senile old Goa foo hiding in her dark study, waiting for the end. I want him to confidently file that emergency guardianship petition next Tuesday morning, completely unaware that he is walking into an ambush. And while they are out at sea? Marcus asked. While they are floating in the middle of the Atlantic sipping champagne on my dime, you and your financial cell will build an ironclad federal case, I replied. Trace the cash from those withdrawals directly to the corrupt physician's accounts. Secure the security footage from the bank branches showing Julian physically extracting the money. Prepare the indictment for conspiracy to commit elder fraud, grand larceny, and federal structuring. Consider it done, Marcus vowed. By the time that luxury ship docks back in Boston, I'll have a team of federal marshals waiting for them at the gangway. They won't even make it to the luggage carousel. Thank you, Marcus. Keep your father safe, I said softly, and firmly ended the call. I pulled the device away from my ear, a cold, undeniable smirk finally breaking across my face. The pieces of the grand chessboard were moving into place, and my treacherous son-in-law had absolutely no idea that he had just casually handed me the exact tactical rope required to hang his entire family. I turned back to my laptop. The financial liquidation needed to be total, instantaneous, and absolute. Julian had bragged about Valerie wearing the Caldwell star to the gala in Monaco. He had laughed about his parents sleeping in my custom-imported silk sheets. They believed that because they had Mitchell Reed, the Caldwell Group's assets were their personal playground. They had completely failed to comprehend the profound, absolute power of how I had structured those assets. When I purchased the Beacon Hill estate they were living in, and when I established the secondary subsidiary lines of the Caldwell Trust, I had legally registered everything under a revocable living trust. At the time, Julian had been mildly annoyed by the complex legal arrangement, foolishly assuming it was just a tedious administrative hurdle to keep him away from the money. He lacked the basic intelligence to understand that as the sole creator and primary grantor of a revocable trust, I held the absolute, unquestionable authority to alter, amend, or completely dissolve the entire legal entity at any given second. I did not need Chloe's signature. I did not need Julian's permission. I didn't even have a legal obligation to inform them that the status of their primary residence was being permanently altered. The house, the cars, the secondary accounts, they were all highly conditional gifts that I could revoke the very moment they proved themselves unworthy. And they had just proven themselves to be actively dangerous. I opened a secondary secure messaging app, contacting Dominic Vance, Julian's other uncle, the black sheep of the family who ran the largest corporate asset liquidation and high-end auction house in New England. Dominic loathed his brother's family even more than Robert did, and he possessed the aggressive clean-out crews needed to move mountains overnight. Dominic, I typed, my words cold and razor-sharp. The Beacon Hill estate is reverting back to my individual name by noon today. I am dissolving the trust. I want a total, absolute liquidation of its physical contents. Every custom sofa, every designer dress, every piece of jewelry left in the drawers. You buy the house as is, take absolute legal ownership of everything inside, and I want your crews in the driveway at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Empty the house down to the bare wooden studs. What you want to sell at auction, you keep. The rest you destroy. A response came back within seconds. With pleasure, Eleanor. The wire transfer for the property liquidation will hit your secure account by Monday morning. Consider their lifestyle officially canceled. I closed the silver laptop with a quiet, beautifully definitive snap. The trap was now entirely complete. The snare had been flawlessly set, and the bait was simply too magnificent for them to ever refuse. Tomorrow morning, Julian, Chloe, and his family would stand on the deck of that massive ocean liner, looking out at the open water, completely enveloped in their unearned arrogance. They would proudly look down at their digital cabin cards, completely expecting my unlimited corporate account to smoothly absorb the massive financial impact of their premium vintage champagne and luxury spa bookings. The absolute humiliation they were about to experience when those cards were brutally declined in the middle of international waters would be genuinely magnificent. They would be trapped on a floating island, cut off from my wealth, forced to desperately empty their own highly depleted bank accounts just to secure a basic satellite connection. And while they were crying over a declined bottle of champagne in the middle of the freezing ocean, Dominic Vance's aggressive corporate demolition crews would be violently throwing their entire material existence into the back of a moving truck. I stood up, smoothed down the front of my cashmere robe, and walked toward the door of my study. I looked back one last time at the ticking Patek Philippe pocket watch on my desk. The storm was coming, but as I walked down the stairs to begin my period of fictional collapse, I felt an overwhelming, absolute sense of profound, permanent, and undeniable peace. The old lioness hadn't lost her teeth. She had simply stepped back into the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The day of reckoning arrived with the cold, unyielding precision of a sliding guillotine. The trap was sprung not with a loud explosion, but with a series of silent, devastating digital detonations that completely obliterated Julian and Chloe's fabricated reality. It was Tuesday morning, the exact day Mitchell Reed was scheduled to march into the Suffolk County Probate Court and officially file the emergency guardianship petition to bury me alive in a memory care facility. Instead, the locks on the heavy double doors of my Beacon Hill study did not just turn, they were bypassed entirely as a tactical team of federal marshals, flanked by Special Agent Marcus Vance, stepped into the corridor, accompanying me as I prepared to deliver the final, crushing blow. Julian and Chloe believed they were completely unreachable, floating contentedly on the sapphire waters of the Atlantic as their luxury cruise liner prepared to dock in the French Riviera. They believed they had outmaneuvered the old queen, leaving a broken Goa Fu weeping in a dark room. They had absolutely no idea that every single move they had made over the last 7 days, the stolen cash, the forged medical affidavits, the hit and run on Robert Vance, and even their discovery of my safe's combination, had been meticulously orchestrated by me. The breakthrough had occurred the moment Julian bragged on the phone about discovering the safe's combination using Arthur's birthday. That wasn't a lapse in my security. It was a carefully laid piece of forensic bait. Inside that safe, resting directly beneath the Caldwell Star Sapphire, was a high-tech, motion-activated microcamera disguised as a velvet lining seam, linked continuously to an encrypted cloud server. The moment Julian's greedy fingers breached that vault, the camera didn't just record his face. It captured high-definition, multi-angle video of him and Chloe systematically executing their grand larceny, laughing as they stuffed my family heirlooms into their pockets, while explicitly discussing the $29,850 cash bribes they had paid to the corrupt physician to structure the Alzheimer's diagnosis. They thought they were stealing a fortune. In reality, they were filming their own federal indictment. And as for Mitchell Reed's sudden, treacherous defection, it was the ultimate sting. I had known about Mitchell's mounting gambling debts in Macau for 6 months. I purposefully allowed him to be approached by Julian, dangling a massive, fabricated piece of legal vulnerability in the Caldwell Trust to see if he would bite. He did. And by signing on to Julian's retainer, Mitchell hadn't outsmarted me. He had legally tethered himself to a sinking ship, transforming his entire legal career into an open and shut case of conspiracy to commit elder fraud and racketeering. The petition was just digitally submitted to the court clerk's queue 5 minutes ago, Eleanor, Special Agent Marcus Vance stated, his voice a low, chilling rumble of pure professional satisfaction as he checked his government tablet. Mitchell Reed just hit send. The trap is officially closed. Then let us pull the cord, Marcus. I replied, my voice a smooth, chillingly calm whisper of absolute unyielding authority. I sat down at my mahogany desk, smoothed the lapels of my cream-tailored suit, and picked up my primary smartphone. With a single tap, I initiated a high-priority, encrypted satellite video conference directly to the Royal Penthouse suite of the luxury liner, utilizing the ship's emergency command bandwidth, a premium maritime privilege I retained as a major shareholder of the cruise line's parent company. The connection went through instantly, bypassing their locked digital folios and forcing the massive, high-definition television screen in their luxury cabin to ignite. The visual that populated on my monitor was pure, unadulterated perfection. The atmosphere inside the Royal Penthouse was absolute chaos. The jazz quartet music from their earlier vacation days was entirely gone, replaced by the shrill, hysterical screaming of Monica Vance, Julian's mother, and the explosive tantrums of his sister Valerie. Julian was pacing frantically across the imported silk sheets, his tailored linen shirt soaked in sweat, his face a pale, pasty mask of absolute sweating terror. Chloe was huddled in the corner of the velvet sofa, clutching her head, crying uncontrollably as a uniformed team of ship security officers stood at the threshold of the cabin, blocking their exit. Their cards had been brutally declined at the premium dining rooms 48 hours ago. They had been forced to stand in the massive, crowded complimentary buffet lines, along with the thousands of ordinary economy passengers they so bitterly mocked, stripped of their VIP status and treated like common thieves by the ship's crew. And now, the final curtain was rising. "Mom!" Chloe screamed into the camera the second my face appeared on their cabin screen. She lunged toward the monitor, her eyes wild, her manicured fingers trembling violently. "Mom, you have to fix this. Something horrific has happened. The ship's security has barricaded us in our room. They say our payment methods are completely fraudulent and the bank accounts are completely empty. The joint emergency fund reads 0. Someone has stolen everything we own." Julian slammed his glass of cheap buffet water onto the counter and sprinted toward the screen, his smooth-talking arrogance completely shattered into jagged pieces of desperate panic. "Eleanor, call off your internet blockades right now. This is an international scandal. My parents are being humiliated. Valerie is having a psychological crisis. We are trapped on this ship without a single dime. Call Mitchell Reed immediately and tell him to release the trust funds." I sat in the quiet comfort of my Boston study, leaning back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers with an excruciating, agonizing slowness. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply fixed them with a dead, thou suat stare that instantly choked the screaming out of the room. "Mitchell Reed cannot help you, Julian," I stated, enunciating every single syllable with razor-sharp, chilling precision. As we speak, federal marshals are currently entering Mitchell's downtown office to place him under arrest for conspiracy, structuring, and corporate fraud. He won't be answering your calls. The silence that instantly fell over the luxury cabin was absolute perfection. Julian's mouth hung wide open, his chest heaving under his wrinkled blazer, his skin rapidly draining of all color until his face was as white as the linen trousers he wore. Chloe's breath hitched, her eyes bulging with a sudden, suffocating realization of their total ruin. "You thought you were being so incredibly clever, didn't you?" I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous, freezing register that echoed through their state-of-the-art speakers. "Let's be entirely honest with ourselves here, Julian. You actually believed that 3 structured withdrawals of exactly $9,950 would slip past the federal radar? You thought that weaponizing a fraudulent Alzheimer's diagnosis against a Goa-Fu was a sophisticated legal strategy? Older people like me get so brittle, so easily confused under pressure. Isn't that what you told me?" Julian took a shaky step back, his knees visibly buckling against the edge of the bed. "Eleanor, no. We were just trying to safeguard the assets. You're misunderstand. I don't misunderstand a single thing, Julian." I cut him off smoothly, my words dropping like heavy lead weights. "You entered my master bedroom. You used Arthur's birthday to open my private safe. And you stood there, laughing with my daughter, while you stole the Caldwell Star Sapphire to put on your sister's young, vibrant neck. Did you honestly believe that I wouldn't have that vault monitored? every word of your medical bribery, every laugh about putting me in a shallow financial grave has been recorded in crystal clear high definition. The FBI has already verified the cash trail directly to your corrupt physician's accounts. The warrant for your arrest has already been signed by a federal judge. Mio, moai kakuaiko. Chloe let out a guttural, breathless shriek, falling completely to her knees on the cabin floor. She grabbed the edge of the velvet sofa, her tears smudging her expensive makeup into an ugly, smeared mess. Mom, please, it was Julian's idea. He forced me to do it. He said we deserve the lifestyle. Please don't do this to your own daughter. We have nowhere to go. You're right, Chloe. You have absolutely nowhere to go, I replied, my face a cold, unyielding mask of pure stone. While you were out at sea enjoying your much-needed, incredibly hard-earned luxury vacation, I permanently dissolved the Revocable Living Trust. I sold the Beacon Hill estate to a corporate liquidation syndicate for cash. The transaction is fully finalized, the deed is recorded, and the funds are permanently settled into my private, impenetrable solo account. Julian's hands began to shake so violently that he had to grip the counter to keep from collapsing entirely onto the floor. The house. You sold our house? It was never your house, Julian. It was a conditional gift to my daughter. A gift that I revoked the very second you proved yourselves to be actively dangerous, I said, a cold, mocking smile breaking across my face. Dominic Vance's clean-out crews entered the property yesterday morning. They stripped the entire mansion down to the bare wooden studs. Every piece of custom furniture, every piece of expensive jewelry you left in the drawers, and every single designer suit hanging in your walk-in closets has been violently tossed into the back of an industrial moving truck. Right now, your entire material existence is stacked in a chaotic pile on the damp public sidewalk of Beacon Hill, covered in garbage bags, with a hand-painted sign that reads, "Free to take." Kaupau a fabgetats. Your custom digital access codes are permanently erased. Your physical keys are entirely worthless. You are officially bankrupt, totally homeless, and entirely cut off from the legacy you so arrogantly believed you were entitled to steal. Monica Vance let out a loud, horrified wail in the background, clutching her chest as she collapsed onto the bed, while Valerie began aggressively ripping the tropical shirt from her shoulders in a state of pure, unadulterated psychological collapse. Julian fell to his knees directly in front of the camera monitor, his hands clasped together in a pathetic, desperate gesture of begging. The thick, arrogant superiority he had displayed in my study just days prior was entirely gone, replaced by the raw, suffocating terror of a trapped animal. "Eleanor, please, I beg you, forgive us. We'll give the necklace back. We'll sign whatever you want. Don't ruin our lives. We have no money for a hotel. We don't even have money for food when this ship lands. We are your family." I leaned forward, looking directly into his pleading, tear-filled eyes through the screen, my voice dropping to a whisper of pure, absolute destruction. "You stopped being my family the exact moment you sat in that room and actively plotted to lock me away in a medical prison, Julian," I stated, my tone devoid of any remaining human mercy. "You told me to stay home, relax, and enjoy the quiet time alone. Well, now the quiet time is yours. You will spend the next 4 days trapped inside that metallic box in the middle of the ocean, without a single cent to your name, slowly descending into total financial madness. And the moment your luxury liner touches the Boston dock next Monday morning, Special Agent Marcus Vance and a team of federal marshals will be waiting at the gangway to escort you directly to a sterile, locked federal holding cell." I paused, letting the immense, crushing weight of their permanent doom saturate the silence of the connection. Chloe was wailing uncontrollably on the floor, her face pressed against the carpet, completely broken. Julian's eyes were blank, staring at the screen in a state of catatonic shock as the realization of his total, irreversible annihilation finally set in. "Have a very safe and highly memorable journey, Julian," I said smoothly. With a definitive, beautifully satisfying click, I terminated the active video call. The monitor went completely black, reflecting my own calm, serene, and majestic expression in the glass. The spring of the trap had opened completely, and the wolves who had tried to devour the matriarch had been thoroughly, systematically slaughtered by their own design. I stood up from my desk, picked up Arthur's ticking Patek Philippe pocket watch, and slid it safely into my pocket. The room felt warm, bright, and lighter than it had in 5 years. The financial and legal execution was flawlessly complete, and the Caldwell Empire was once again under the absolute, undisputed control of its rightful creator. The quiet that returned to my study after the screen went black was no longer heavy or suffocating. It was a clean, restorative silence, the kind that settles over a landscape after a devastating wildfire has finally burned itself out, leaving the ground fertile and bare. I stood up from the mahogany desk and walked over to the window. Outside, the morning rain had completely stopped. The thick, bruised violet clouds that had obscured the Boston sky were breaking apart, allowing long, brilliant shafts of golden sunlight to pierce through the mist and illuminate the wet, historic brick streets of Beacon Hill. My chest, which had felt as though it were bound in tight iron bands since the moment I received that treacherous text message at dawn, expanded with a deep, effortless breath. The phantom ache of a mother's grief had entirely dissolved, replaced by a profound, unyielding state of absolute tranquility. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the intricate engraving of Arthur's vintage Patek Philippe pocket watch. I pulled it out, pressed the release catch, and watched the gold cover swing open. Tick, tick, tick. The mechanical heartbeat of the man I loved was no longer a ticking time bomb. It was a rhythmic reminder of a promise kept. The crown had been defended, the legacy was secure, and the parasitic shadows who had tried to weaponize our sacred memories to fund their own superficial greed were now completely locked out of the empire we built. 2 days later, I boarded a premium, first-class British Airways flight out of Logan International Airport, leaving the cold, damp spring of New England entirely behind. I did not stay to watch the federal marshals place the handcuffs on Julian and Mitchell Reed. I did not care to witness Chloe sobbing as her fingers were pressed into a booking sheet. I had given 40 years of my life to the concrete and glass towers of Boston, fighting the wolves of the financial sector to secure a future for a daughter who ultimately chose to become a predator. I had fulfilled my duty as a mother. Now it was time to fulfill my promise to myself. Today, the sun shines with a brilliant, blinding warmth over the azure waters of the Caribbean. I am currently sitting on the private veranda of a luxury estate on the quiet, exclusive island of St. Bart's. A soft, warm, tropical breeze rustles the palm fronds overhead, carrying the faint, sweet scent of hibiscus and salt water. A perfectly chilled glass of mineral water rests on the marble table beside me, casting a small, dancing prism of light onto a book of classic literature that I finally have the time to read in peace. There are no corporate board meetings to manage. There are no frantic, manipulative text messages vibrating against my countertop. There are no deceptive son-in-laws calculating my expiration date over a plate of expensive food. For the first time in 5 years, the deafening silence of my life does not feel empty. It feels like freedom. From my vantage point, I can see a massive, pristine white luxury yacht anchored far out in the bay, its hull gleaming under the pristine tropical sun. I look at it and smile a slow, appreciative smile. Somewhere across the vast expanse of the Atlantic, a different ship is docking in France, and a group of greedy, arrogant thieves are realizing that their paradise was nothing more than a beautifully designed mirage. They are learning that when you try to bury the matriarch alive, you only end up digging your own financial and legal grave. I reach into my small velvet travel pouch and pull out a pair of silver cufflinks, Arthur's favorites, the ones engraved with the Caldwell crest. I walk down the stone steps of the veranda, past the manicured gardens, until my sandals sink into the warm, powdery white sand of the private beach. The tide is coming in, the crystalline water lapping gently against my feet. I look out at the endless horizon, where the deep blue of the ocean meets the cloudless sky. I hold the silver cufflinks in the palm of my hand for a brief, emotional moment, letting the warmth of the sun heat the metal. "We made it back, Arthur," I whisper into the breeze, my voice steady, light, and completely at peace. With a smooth, fluid motion, I toss the silver cufflinks out into the surf. I watch them flash once in the sunlight before they disappear beneath the clear, turquoise waves, sinking gracefully to the ocean floor. The circle is closed. The vow is fulfilled. I turn back toward the estate, stepping out of the wet sand, thoroughly ready to begin the beautiful, unburdened chapter of the rest of my life. Blood makes you related, but loyalty and respect make you family. In the high-stakes world of wealth and legacy, the deep scars of betrayal rarely come from the enemies we face in the boardroom. They come from the very people we tucked into bed, the ones we sacrificed our own happiness to protect. True family doesn't plot your downfall while sipping champagne on your dime. They stand as an ironclad fortress by your side. Eleanor Caldwell reclaimed her throne because she understood that a crown is not given. It is defended with absolute resolve. But her story leaves us with a chilling question that echoes far beyond the historic brick streets of Boston. What would you do if the person you loved and trusted the most, the one you spent your entire life providing for, secretly signed the paperwork to lock you away forever? Have you ever had to teach an entitled, toxic family member a harsh lesson in reality? Let me know your thoughts and your own experiences with family betrayal in the comments below. If you found Eleanor's swift, tactical justice deeply satisfying, hit that like button, share this video with someone who values true loyalty, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, deep-cutting drama stories. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next day of reckoning.
Câu chuyện chính là sự tỉnh táo định hình ranh giới giữa tình mẫu tử thiêng liêng và lòng tự trọng tối thượng. Huyết thống suy cho cùng chỉ xác lập một mối quan hệ trên danh nghĩa. Chính lòng trung thành và sự tôn trọng tự thân mới là thứ xây dựng nên một gia đình thực sự. Thực tế cay đắng chỉ ra rằng, sự nương chiều mù quáng không bao giờ có thể cảm hóa hay đổi lấy lòng hiếu thảo từ những kẻ ích kỷ và tham lam. Khi đối mặt với sự phản bội tàn nhẫn từ chính những người ruột thịt, lòng vị tha vô điều kiện đó sẽ trở thành điểm yếu chí mạng, biến bản thân bạn thành nạn nhân của sự đào thải. Giữ một cái đầu lạnh, điềm tĩnh thiết lập khoảng cách để bảo vệ tài sản và tôn nghiêm cá nhân trước những kẻ ký sinh nhân danh tình thâm mới là biểu hiện của sự thông thái tối thượng của một người mẹ bản lĩnh.